Hi, I'm Liz. Welcome to my room. I have never really done a video presentation before, so I'm just going to pretty much read everything word for word off of this bad boy. As someone who keeps some of her brains in her head and most of them on the counter, in my pocket, in the fridge, forgotten in the car, and occasionally left on the shelf entirely, I pointed like I had a shelf behind me, I don't. I often have incredible difficulty picking a small portion of something I want to talk about. In this case, 2 sources. I'm not going to be doing that. Because of this, it begged the questions for me of many things. How do we perceive and assign gender when assessing human skeletal remains and artifacts outside of the realm of DNA testing? Who is doing this research? How does their background and their biases, as well as the intersectionality of their own identity, play a part in how they assign gender and subsequent roles of what that person must have done in history due to their anatomy or things that were left with them? And how are women and individuals assigned female at birth perceived and treated in today's society, and how does that affect the ability of the scientific community to see a full and complete picture of what the past may have looked like? How do these things differ from what we actually know about societal roles and how work was divided tens of thousands of years ago, which I won't get too much into because I think that we have already talked about that a lot. These are more things that I pondered on in my research, and also things that I hope you guys do the same and just think about and maybe go do your own. Who is involved in research of ancient civilizations and archaeological discovery, and how has this changed over time? And then what knowledge and understanding of the past would look like if more researchers were women or assigned female at birth or non-binary or trans or people of color or anything else? These questions caused me to find way more sources than required, and thus the trouble of figuring out which 2 would provide best insight into the modern world. Again, I don't do that. I have many sources, and you can read them all in my giant paper that I'm going to attach. This led me to the following. In an article titled "What Ancient Gender Fluidity Taught Me About Modern Patriarchy," written by María, Fernanda, Ugalde, after assessing figurines from Ecuador, she says about these figurines. Through this collection, and here are the figurines here, if I can not drop them. Throughout this collection, I see figures that combine elements they often associated with male and female genders, combinations that other archaeologists seem to have overlooked or dismissed. And I see a stark transition about 2,500 years ago from what seems to be an art focusing on female symbolism to an art perhaps trying to legitimize a patriarchal structure. The figurines' shifting poses regarding facial expressions and clothing have something to say about changing attitudes regarding gender politics and positions of power. But the ancient artisans did not always express this division, sometimes combining female physical features with male dress and vice versa. This did not happen often, but there are enough such figurines to build a category of what might now be described as non-binary or transgender people. She goes on to say that maybe other researchers didn't notice this pattern because of their own gender biases. The modern patriarchy tends to naturalize concepts like binary gender relations as if they were timeless and unchangeable. They are not. Another source, Engendering the Past by Isabel Murr et al., goes over various different case studies of gender in archaeology, mentioning Teresa Preston Werner's research on figurines from the Guanacaste Nicoya zone, explaining in Costa Rica, explaining that they are not easy to classify as either male or female due to the style of their hats, the ambiguity of their genitalia, and their position. The male-female binary, she concludes, must have not been essential to their social meaning. Teresa also finds that most burials were consistent with class rather than gender. An article that we all read this quarter, Dismantling the Man-the-Hunter Myth, reminds us how estrogen plays a role in her body, and that it would give women, or people assigned female at birth, more endurance, or I would say people who are possessing of more estrogen in their body, regardless of gender, more endurance and would be good for hunting. This means that the notion a lot of us have been taught about men being more suited for hunting and women being more suited for gathering or tending young, reminder that my use of men and women here is contextual, is likely inaccurate and driven by patriarchal belief systems such as the nuclear family and religion, which we won't get into. If we know all of this, Excuse me. And we can see that there are clearly women in the field researching human evolution and culture today. Then what's the deal? Why are there still biases and binaries? Well, let us look at who has historically done the research, or not done the research. One of my favorite sources starts out strong, hitting us in the very first paragraph with the harsh reality of history. The Northern Arizona University webpage titled Sexism and Homophobia lays it out clearly. Women became involved in archaeology during the 19th century, even though they were expected to be in the home during the 19th and 20th centuries. It was not ladylike to have a job in a dominated field by men, and manly things such as wearing pants, working outdoors, using tools and weapons, experiencing harsh weather conditions, and participating in physical labor. Because of the roots of homophobia that was had in cultures around the world, if women were as smart as men, participated in man-like behaviors, and were not staying in the home, then they were often considered to be lesbians. This judgment likely kept numerous women out of archaeology in the 19th and 20th centuries. Now, of course, we only have so much time, as I'm already at 6 minutes of my 3 to 5 minute presentation, to talk about the long history of exclusion of women and people of color, as well as other genders or non-binary people in archaeology, as well as pretty much everything ever. So I will jump into the future and talk about what is happening now. And I realized that I wrote that down, but this is from 2013, and I'm starting to feel my age. Anyways, in 2013, there was an all-female expedition composed of 6 women whose names I listed in my paper, but cannot remember off the top of my head, nor did I write down in this section. My bad. This is them. You can't really see them. Click the link. It's in my paper. Go see them yourself. I have included in the bottom of the paper, go check them out. This expedition was called the Rising Star Expedition. The Rising Star women were the only ones capable of fitting in a cave in South Africa. And in that cave, with a mere 8-inch opening, they discovered 8. Also, how? First of all, let's just say how. Anyways, they discovered the famous Homo naledi from the Middle Pleistocene. They also then advocated for open access, which is very uncommon and was very uncommon for archaeological findings, meaning that everyday people could not only access knowledge about the past in a way never before seen, they could print the fossils on a 3D printer and look at them themselves. That's insane. That is insane, but it revolutionized the field. And their advocation did so much for women and so many other people in the field. Cathy Willermet, in her article Biological Anthropology in 2015, which talks about this, goes on to say that the practices of the Rising Star Expedition lie in stark contrast to those of traditional paleoanthropology, where seniority-based access supports established, usually male researchers. Instead, agency was given to groups historically disadvantaged, and in paleoanthropology, this means women, early career scientists, and locals. If we go back to Engendering the Past, Murr explains what is meant by feminist archaeology, saying that feminist archaeology acknowledges and celebrates complexity. Moreover, it seeks to expose the biases towards heteronormative interpretations that are all too frequent in the field. I will mention that this source does not exclude the fact that a lot of the time women were in roles of caretakers. But it is very fascinating, this article, because it is so unbiased. I won't get into that as much, but I will just say, reflecting on the findings of María and Teresa and these other women, we see patterns of noticing things that people raised as men in this world might not. Little details like loincloths and breasts on the same figure may not seem like much to some people, but to others, absolutely earth-shattering and history-changing integral pieces of information. This as well as looking at Rising Star women shows that diversity and intersectionality are absolutely fundamental in this work. And before I conclude, I realize I forgot to show you the dang cave. This is the dang cave, and you can't really see it. Please go click on it in my paper because it's actually insane. I've included so many links that you could actually see. But this is the cave itself. I'm going to get this so backwards, but this is, this is the opening. Seems pretty normal. 10 inches tall, 10 inches. What? How do you get in there? They got in there. And then they kept going, and then there's this, which is 8 inches. And it's, I think, like 15 meters down. Like, it's insane. And they go down into this cave, which is this, and they found Homo naledi. And it would not have been possible without women. Sure, they could have found some archaeologists that were tiny, 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 tiny men, but they didn't. They let 6 women go down into this cave, and it changed the world, and it changed history. Which brings me to my next point, which is my conclusion. Considering all of what we have learned here in 10 minutes, double the time, my apologies, guys, we can reflect on a few topics. Who is looking at artifacts and assessing their meanings affects how those artifacts are perceived and therefore published upon. This then affects how the general public perceives history and modern society as well, based upon the beliefs of professionals that they get their information from. This is why having a diverse pool of researchers and intersectional identities is absolutely crucial in gathering a full and comprehensive understanding of the world around us and our own history as humans. Patriarchal beliefs and biases undermine the contribution of people with female anatomy in order to boost the idea that people with male anatomy are stronger and more capable of things like hunting, which we can confirm is not factual or rooted in reality. This not only aims to subdue and control people with female anatomy, but also leaves no room for a softer view of people with male anatomy. The conclusions of this portion of my research show that gender binary is not evidence-based and is harmful to our understanding of the truth of history. Thank you.